Well, a good tennis player knows how to change direction on the baseline, and a good tennis entrepreneur knows how to change the direction of the development of the sport, and a creator of Spec Tennis, someone who is definitely changing the game in a positive way. It is Nate Gross, who is founder of Spec Tennis, which is an interesting sport that he got into, that he has developed, and it has sort of been an ally to tennis. In no way, Nate, would you say that it is a competition. I'm Bryan Fenley, a broadcaster for USTA and also an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. This is going to be a chance on the On to Something podcast to showcase what Nate is doing with Spec Tennis and also what he's also been able to do in tennis over the course of his career. Nate, really appreciate you doing this. So really enjoying the concept of Spec Tennis from the perspective, as you have been mentioning, and I checked out your recent interviews on the Tennis Channel podcast networks, where it essentially is a sport that can be in the size of a pickleball court. You have a smaller paddle and the compression is less on the ball. Where were you when this idea came into your mind, where you thought, I love tennis, but there's something else I can add?
I was in Santa Rosa, California about 5 years ago, and I saw the pickleball courts for the first time. I didn't really know about pickleball yet, but I played a little paddle tennis in Venice Beach, California when I was on vacation as a kid. And so I wanted to try to play that because I hadn't been able to find that in NorCal. There's very limited courts in the country for paddle tennis. And so I went out there with my dad and we tried it out. I'm a tennis teaching pro, so I was aware of the different balls that were out there. So I started playing around with different paddles, different balls, and settled on the orange dot ball as being the best for that court size, and started the sport with a platform tennis paddle, which is popular on the East Coast. But since then, the paddle has evolved to a Spec Tennis specific paddle, which is a bit lighter, and some other modifications to the paddle as well.
You can check out, everybody that's watching and listening this, spectennis.com, for a lot more insights on to what Nate is talking about. How about the most hotly contested Spec Tennis battle you were in when you were going back and forth with a competitor? Where were you? If I was watching this, set the scene for me.
I'd have to say it was probably a singles exhibition match in Portland, Oregon last year. I was playing against a tennis pro who I worked with in California for about 5 years. He went up to that club. We held a tournament at his club, but we had an exhibition before the tournament. And he's probably about 7 years older than me, at least. I'm 30, and maybe 7 to 10 years older than me, but he played tennis at UCLA, so he's a good player. And I came into the match knowing that I had more Spec Tennis experience. He hadn't played that much, but he beat me in 3 sets, and so that was pretty tough. I felt like I was definitely out of shape during that match. I was in tennis teaching shape, but not tennis playing shape, and every point was just grueling and a lot of fun. We had a big crowd in front of us, so oftentimes a bigger crowd than we often had for college tennis matches.
And the crowd is certainly growing and encircling around this sport that you've been behind in Spec Tennis. We're joined by its creator, Nate Gross. I'm Bryan Fenley, a broadcaster for the USTA. You also played Division I tennis, and so you take that experience with you to where you are now. You played in the Big Sky with Idaho State. What would you say was the most tense battle in college? Because you had a great singles ranking as far as your record in college. What was the most dramatic, tense singles battle you were involved in during your collegiate career?
Singles battle. Can I give you a doubles battle?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So at Idaho State, we're Division I. We weren't that great, but we weren't ranked or anything like that. But we got the opportunity to play some big schools sometimes. And so there's one match where we were playing in a tournament against University of Oregon, Pac-12 school. So we always wanted to try to win against them. They were tough, but it was a close match. And on the changeover, we were sitting right next to the Oregon players. The Oregon assistant coach started yelling at the Oregon players saying, like, look who you guys are playing against. You're playing against Idaho State. And so that fired us up from that point. We knew we weren't going to lose that match, and felt bad for the Oregon guys because they were nice guys. Their coach was just a little wild, but we ended up winning that match, but then couldn't celebrate for too long because you know how tournaments are. They put you on the court half hour later for the next match, that kind of thing. So I'd say that was the most memorable college win.
I love it. And the sport itself and what you've developed has motivated so many in a general sense of becoming more in love with tennis by first investing yourself into Spec Tennis. It's sort of been a bridge, as you mentioned in your website, to tennis. If you would have founded Spec Tennis at a younger age during your development as a tennis player, where do you think your pathway, your trajectory might have differed if it was more present in your life earlier than it was just 5 years later than where we are now, or
Um,
5 years before?
I definitely think I could have become a better player in my career. Maybe played at a even higher level school. I don't know about beyond that, but I think I would have enjoyed tennis more as a kid because I mean it was one of those things. If you're a junior tennis player, it's pretty lonely out there, and I didn't belong to a club or anything, so I was just growing up playing with my dad every day, and that can get stale over time. Just butting heads with your parent, and so I think had I had Spec Tennis, I would have been motivated to work harder as a junior, and also it just would have been nice to 1 day a week, 2 days a week, just play Spec Tennis and still work on refining my tennis skills, just have something different.
What is it about Spec Tennis that when you get people giving you feedback where they say, this is what draws me back every time, or this aspect of Spec Tennis is why I can't stop playing the sport, or I can't stop finding a place to play with friends?
Yeah, I think that the fact that you can play with anybody. So I'm hearing a lot of families playing together, a lot of husband and wives playing together that wouldn't normally be able to go play tennis together. But also one comment that stuck out to me was play doubles with a guy. And he said that those incredible points that you might get in a tennis match, maybe once a match, you get those in Spec Tennis maybe once a game or a couple times a set. And so just because of the dynamics of the court being smaller, people have the ability to make better gets. And so it's a lot harder to hit a winner. So you might hit 3 or 4 shots that would be a winner in tennis, and the point's still not over yet in Spec Tennis.
As you see Spec Tennis in a way have similarities with pickleball, where do you look at the differences between both, and where do you find that there's more of an upside with Spec Tennis?
I think with pickleball, it's great for getting people on the court that might not otherwise go on the court, because a lot of these people aren't going to become tennis players, and a certain percentage of Spec Tennis players might not become tennis players. But I think the upside is that if they want to become tennis players, they're building a really good foundation for that, because I teach the same exact strokes and strategies as I would in tennis. And I oftentimes include it in my tennis lessons using a progression model where I'll teach them with the paddle first. And then once they get the skill and they're able to rally with me in various situations, then I transition them to the tennis racket. And it's amazing what the brain can do in terms of finding the sweet spot just with a little bit of practice. And so if I'm handed a ping pong paddle, I can find the center of it. If I'm handed a squash racket, tennis racket, Spec Tennis paddle. And so I think that it's really, it can reach a larger audience, both pickleball and Spec Tennis, because I can oftentimes get players rallying on the first day. If they can't rally on the first day, it's pretty soon after that they're able to actually rally and go out and hit the ball back and forth with their friends. Whereas we know with tennis, it takes a lot longer. And so you have to be more committed to tennis and maybe even spend some money on lessons to get to that level.
Nate Gross is with us, the founder of Spec Tennis, an awesome offshoot of tennis, which is gaining a lot of momentum right now, as you can see by him having interviews every day, it seems. It's really neat to see the traction that this is getting. I'm Bryan Fenley, and I was listening to your interview with Parenting Aces on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network, and you spoke about how you were putting on these clinics where you'd have 14 or so kids, and they were under your tutelage of you teaching them the sport. And you pointed out how easy it is to rally. And so it wasn't one of those situations where you were having to feed balls, and that gets a little bit monotonous and tiresome, because sometimes finding that sweet spot for the youngsters is not always the easiest thing. But what is it about you doing that? And then, like you said, I think you did it for what was it, 12 weeks? And it grows and grows and grows. What is it about the way in which you govern, you coach, you oversee, you motivate, that has people keep coming back to you, whether that's juniors, whether that's others who want to be coached by you, by the way in which you carry yourself out on the court?
I mean, I think a lot of it is the sport. I mean, I'm not out there giving any, it's not rocket science, the instruction that I'm giving. I mean, the tips are very simple, which I think is great for kids, not giving them too much to think about, but just setting them up in an environment where they can have success and knowing progressions and regressions that you can quickly switch kids to. So you might have some kids over here that are at a higher level than the kids over here, but they're all on the same court, and you just quickly modify what kid A is doing, and then kid B is doing something a little bit more advanced. And so just kind of having that in my wheelhouse to know what's the next progression once this kid gets this, so that he's not bored. I need to challenge him somehow, and just being able to fire those off really quickly with a quick 10-second demonstration so that you're not stopping the class. I think that was kind of the key to the whole thing. And I just kind of wanted to see if I could break the norm of tennis coaching, where we typically have 4 kids per pro or 6 kids per pro. And I was pretty confident going in, but I mean, I had no idea in week 1 if it was going to work 14 kids with me, but I did it for 12 weeks, and I thought that it worked out really well, and I plan on doing it again.
You know what also worked out really well is playing Spec Tennis in an airport terminal. I saw the video of that, and it was a little demonstration where there was like a little makeshift, space in the terminal, and you had 2 of your supporters, and they had paddles, and they had the ball, and nobody was getting in their way. What was your reaction to seeing how creative and innovative people are getting with where they're able to play this sport?
I was pretty shocked at first. I thought it was going to be a 10-second video, but it went on for 3 or 4 minutes. I thought some security was going to come over and tell them to stop, but it doesn't make a lot of noise. You can control the ball in the space. It bounces good on the carpet, obviously, in the airport. And I just thought it was pretty cool that they brought their paddles with them instead of checking them in their luggage. They just brought them on the plane with them. So I've seen a lot of people playing in different areas. I mean, during quarantine, I set up a ball machine in my house and was like volleying into a garbage can. And so I think there's a lot of creative ways. There's another guy in North Carolina who actually built a tennis net in his driveway and has been playing with his son. And his son's a pretty high performance junior, so they're really ripping the ball back and forth in their driveway. So I think it's fun when people send these things in.
Speaking of people sending things in, there was that nice recommendation reference from Adam Bain, former COO of Twitter. He picked up the sport, and how did he become introduced to it? And why was it that he himself also was so enthralled with the sport?
So I taught Adam tennis lessons for probably about 9 months in Mill Valley, California. And one day we were working on his 2-handed backhand, and he just wasn't feeling it. And so we went through every possible different scenario of how we can make his 2-handed backhand better. And one day we just asked, what do you think about a one-hander? You want that? You want to try that? I said, yeah. I said, all right, let's start off with this, because then we go through a progression. You'll be able to build confidence right away rather than starting from scratch with the tennis racket. And so we just went through the progression of using the Spec Tennis paddle, switching back to the racket, switching back to the paddle multiple times. And he really bought into the concept of like, wow, I think I learned that a lot faster than I would have had you just been hitting to me or feeding me balls with the racket.
When you started this thing, and we're joined by Nate Gross, I'm Bryan Fenley. You started this thing in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, 5 years prior. When you have a plan, or when you had a plan for where this would go, back then, where did you think you would be in 5 years compared to where you are now that it has been 5 years?
Definitely had a different plan back then. I just was looking for a fun social activity. I mean, if for the tennis pros out there, you teach tennis 40, 50 hours a week, and you don't really want to play tennis on your free time. So Spec Tennis was just enough of a difference. I could go out with tennis buddies and play it and have a blast and get a good workout. And so that's kind of where I envisioned it at first, just being a fun social gathering. But the more I learned, I guess, as a tennis pro, I realized like this could be a great way to get new players into the game, and also be able to teach players with, in my opinion, a more effective system where they can actually practice on their own. So I oftentimes give my tennis lessons paddles to take home with them and tell them, don't practice with the tennis racket. We're talking beginning tennis players, beginning adults. Go ahead and practice with the paddles when you're with her, because you're going to have more success. You're going to build the confidence, and you're more likely to stick with the skill than if you're out there rallying with the tennis rackets and the rallies are really short. So I tried it a couple of times in my lessons, and then I really bought into the power of it, and I've just been kind of doing it ever since.
The paddles, for those who have not seen what they're like and how they're different than an actual tennis racket, how would you describe the way in which you have designed these paddles and how they're different than the traditional tennis racket?
So the tennis racket's 27 inches, the Spec Tennis paddle's 18 inches. So that 9-inch difference makes a huge difference in terms of bringing the sweet spot closer to your hand. So imagine if you're going to hit something with your hand, you would have more success than if you're going to hit something with a tennis racket if you've never played tennis before. And so just bringing that sweet spot closer allows you to make contact on the center more often. The paddle doesn't have strings, it has holes. And that the main reason for the holes to take the weight out of it. It's made from a EVA high density or medium density foam with a graphite rim around it, and it's circular shaped. The handle's a little smaller than a tennis handle, but I still hit a two-handed backhand with it very often as well. And it looks similar to a couple other paddles out there, but the main differences are the weight and the hole size, and also the grit on the surface. There's no, it's a textured paint. There's no glass grit like you might see on a platform tennis paddle.
So how did you figure out that that was the way you wanted to go with the paddle, and take us through the design and how through your thinking you were finally able to lay that out and what you were looking for?
So we started using the platform tennis paddles. Those are 12.5 ounces. I'm a believer in heavy paddles, heavy rackets, because I think that players have to use better technique. We have a lot of light tennis rackets out there, 9 ounces, that players can get a lot of power with very little effort, and oftentimes swinging with just the arm. And so I actually like heavier things, but a lot of players were complaining about the weight of the paddle. They liked the sport itself, but just felt that the 12.5 ounce paddle was too heavy. And I began to agree with them over time, especially those who have played pickleball before. The pickleball paddles are 7 or 8 ounces, so it's very light compared to the Spec Tennis paddle. And no matter how much I preach, like, this is going to help your technique because it causes you to turn your shoulders and use your legs if you want to generate power with a heavier paddle. I eventually realized, like, I need to take the weight out of it. The platform tennis paddles were designed for a heavier ball. The platform tennis ball is a lot heavier than the Spec Tennis ball, and so that's not needed as much for Spec Tennis. And try to figure out ways to take out the weight. I wanted to give the paddle more of an identity, and so I made the hole size bigger, which took out a lot of the weight. And then I was also cutting my finger often on the glass grit that was on the platform tennis paddle, and other people were having the same experience. So I tested it out without grit to see if I could still generate the same spin on the ball, and eventually settled kind of a happy medium where put a little bit of textured paint on there to add a little bit more feel.
The way in which I'm listening to you break this down, I think to myself, no wonder you were an ITA All-American, because of how bright you are and your way of thinking through these things. We are joined by Nate Gross. He is the founder of Spec Tennis. I encourage everybody to check out spectennis.com to see what the growing trend is as far as how you can get involved. And of course, you can reach out to Nate as well. Nate, what are the ways in which you suggest anybody who is remotely interested to find a way to get themselves ingratiated into what you're doing?
Like you said, spectennis.com is a great resource. There's also Spec Tennis on Facebook, at Spec Tennis on Instagram, YouTube channel. If you type in Spec Tennis, you'll find it. But you can also email me directly, nate@spectennis.com.
I want to leave you with this, Nate. Who do you think is the best Spec Tennis player in the world right now?
Well, we actually have had some tournaments in California, so we have some rankings in place. Right now, it's this guy Shane Barlow in Petaluma, California, and we'll see. We're excited about planning a big national tournament, the U.S. Open, for February in Florida. So that should shake things up a little bit. Hopefully, Shane can make it out to that. But we're expecting hopefully over 200 players to come out to that, and so we're in the planning process of that right now.
This is going to be my final question. When you see where you have taken this in 5 years, where potentially could this go in the next 5 years forthcoming?
I think it could be in universities. I think it could become one of the main tennis teaching methods. I mean, there's a lot of systems out there for teaching tennis to beginning players, whether it's kids or adults. And I think it could really be one of the main ones, especially because there's no stigma attached to it that it's kids tennis. And so I use the RLGY system on a daily basis, but a lot of people don't use it. They don't like it because they feel like it's kids tennis. So if you try to get out there with an adult player and have them use kid size equipment, It doesn't usually go over too well. But with Spec Tennis being kind of this two-prong approach where it can be a bridge into tennis and it's also a social sport, everybody's using the same equipment. There's no such thing as junior racket or a junior ball. And so I think it could really become a big part of teaching tennis players. I found that it's really easy to attract players to your program with it. Just simply talking to them, they might be interested in tennis, but they think that it's hard. You mentioned Spec Tennis, you talk about it for a minute and they're willing to come out and try it, especially when they see their friends are able to rally really quickly. So, I mean, I'm thinking 5-year plan, that's a long time away, but I'm hoping there's a pro tour by then. And it just becomes a pretty widely recognized sport worldwide.
Nate Gross, I am in awe of what you're doing. I am thrilled for you, and I'm excited to see where this goes, because you certainly have found a niche and you are exploiting it. And I can just see this thing balloon in unimaginable ways as this thing continues to grow across this country and internationally. You can, of course, find everything that Nate is up to. He mentioned it on Facebook, but also his website, spectennis.com. That is a great place to get involved, see all that you can do as far as getting invested in the sport. My favorite thing about this, Nate, is, like you pointed out, it's how easy it is to get rallies going, because like you've pointed out in several interviews, and you also have a great YouTube channel. I encourage everybody to check out Spec Tennis on YouTube and their YouTube channel. But it can be so challenging. Like if you're a beginner playing tennis, you haven't picked up the racket for a while, and you're trying to sustain a rally from the baseline going back and forth and keeping the ball in play. As you know, that's not always an easy thing to do with some of the beginners. So by changing the court dimensions, by changing the paddle, it really allows all different skill sets to be able to be more concentrated in rallies. And like you said, it makes it more engaging and more fun.
Oh, you hit the nail on the head. Thank you.
Yes. And I will be voicing your next radio commercial. No, I'm just kidding. Nate Gross, appreciate you so much. I'm Bryan Fenley, and really looking forward to seeing how this goes and where it takes you, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Brian.